For the Investing News Network, I'm Brian McGovern, here today with Peter Aceto, the CEO of CannTrust Holdings. Peter, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, my pleasure, Brian. Thanks for giving me the time as well.
Peter, last time we spoke, the NYSE listing for CannTrust was up and coming, and I had asked you what were your expectations moving forward, what things would change. Now that we're sort of halfway through 2019 and looking ahead at the second half, tell me some of the things that you've noticed that have really been a difference maker thanks to that NYSE listing.
Yeah, I think there are three things that are very, very noticeable. So the first one is, we did it in order to give U.S. And global institutional investors easier access to CannTrust stock. It was our opportunity in the U.S. and outside of the U.S. to tell our story, right, and to let people know about us and the core competencies that we have and what our strategy is, right. So to get the opportunity to introduce ourselves to a whole new set of investors, and we very, very effectively, did the largest equity capital raise of a Canadian LP in the U.S. So I think the output is we introduced ourselves to some very, very exciting, long-holding institutional investors that didn't have access to us before. We've been able to tell our story. We were able to raise the capital so we can execute on our strategy. So I think that's the first thing, which is really, really good, very, very exciting. The second thing for the businesses, with SOX 404 and compliance and the types of rigor that we have to have in policies and procedures that we have in place, which really I think are stepped up in many ways because we're on the New York Stock Exchange, is really a catalyst for us being stronger internally in terms of internal controls and those types of things that investors would hope that a company is really good at. I'd say the third thing is giving the opportunity to talk about our business on that scale has introduced us to some very, very exciting strategic partners, right, who are interested in talking to us about leveraging our knowledge and their knowledge to do things in Canada, but also in other countries around the world. So I think those are three very clear things that have kind of come out of that listing.
When it comes to the U.S. market, I'm sure this is something that you're thinking about a lot. Canadian firms have been put in this position where every expert you talk to, every portfolio manager you talk to mentions the move to the U.S. from the investor point of view. That enthusiasm, that interest is moving to the MSOs. And I'm sure, with all the deals that we've seen so far this year, how do you oversee the U.S. play? How do you foresee it for CannTrust as well? Obviously, we've seen some Canadian companies announce plans, hemp market as well, and also potentially with MSO deals. For you, for CannTrust, what's kind of that overview? That's the long-term look, or what are you thinking moving forward into 2019?
Yeah, so there's actually a couple potential answers to your question. So the first one I'll say is, with a lot of investors that I have spoken to, particularly Canadian ones, they're beginning to think more about moving their investments toward U.S. investments. They see a much bigger valuation opportunity in the U.S. So I think Canadian capital is looking that way. However, thinking of large institutional and global investors who really haven't invested in the cannabis space, I see a big impetus because they're being very, very selective about the cannabis companies that they want to invest in and that they have track record and that they have some of the processes and procedures so they can feel comfortable. And I think notably about our partners, Bank of America or Credit Suisse or Citigroup or Royal Bank of Canada, who are new in terms of covering this space. So I think there's also money for established Canadian LPs in the capital markets as well. So two competing forces there. When you look at the new rule and regulation changes with regards to the Farm Bill and with regards to hemp and CBD, for us, this creates a significant opportunity. Our plan is to leverage our knowledge and our know-how and our medical success in Canada to grow globally, particularly on the medical side. But you look at that U.S. market, which is a huge market. We're actively pursuing multiple discussions with strategic partners so that we can be a part of that U.S. Market opportunity as well. So I think several things in your answer there, but I think it's certainly fun and exciting times as the U.S. market becomes a little bit clearer in terms of rules and regulations.
I see. Very interesting. When it comes to the state of the investment market right now, how would you categorize it? You know, CanTrust is stock on the TSX has seen a fair ride so far this year. I believe BMO recently gave you guys an upgrade and a buy option as well. So, what can CanTrust investors look forward to looking ahead?
Yeah, so for investors in the space, I mean, look, I tell people on a regular basis it is a very, very volatile space, right? And it isn't for everybody. And the different companies and how they're valued doesn't seem to be completely logical, although I think it's not too many quarters ahead where people will be giving the valuations to the people who are delivering, right? And they're executing, and the revenue is coming, and the international stories that they're telling are actually becoming real and turning into real revenue. So listen, when I think of CanTrust, I'm very excited and optimistic for the future, and see, CanTrust's strategy is very much a global one. We see in 5 or 6 years from now, and this is from publicly available information, the global cannabis market's going to be 150 billion a year in annual revenue. Some people say 300 billion a year. So in between that, and I think having a 5.5 year track record, having the core competencies that we've built in this country over the last 5 years, particularly on the medical side, gives us a huge opportunity to be one of the global players. And look, I try not to look at that stock price every day, like many of your listeners probably do. I know that if we continue to build our team, if we deliver on our promises, if we continue to execute, we continue to find really, really good global partners, CanTrust is going to get more than its fair share of this global opportunity.
And Pierre, I do want to ask you about the campaign you just announced at the first day of the Lift Show, the We Care program for CanTrust. Obviously, the marijuana industry has offered a lot of social activism and has been its roots start, I believe so, in social activism. Can you talk about the importance of this program and the importance of investing in some of these social causes and the way that you hope that your investors will hear and appeal to these programs in terms of like the good you're trying to do with some of these aids?
Yeah, look, I mean, I've been working and have been in leadership positions for a relatively long time, and I've always wanted to work with companies that balanced all of its stakeholders. Yes, we have to make money, and that is very, very important. That's why we're here, right? But we have to help our employees, right? We have to be good citizens in the communities where we live and where we work, right? I mean, we've got almost 400 employees in the Niagara region, right? And we're growing really, really rapidly, and we have an obligation to that community to make sure that they love the fact that we're there beyond the jobs, right? So I think really good companies that can grow and be sustainable, meaning they'll be around for decades and decades and decades to come, balance all their stakeholder needs, right? So at CanTrust, now that we have resources and we have more employees, we've decided to formalize the We Care program, right? I mean, we were always giving back to our community, but it was very grassroots and it was employee driven. Now we've actually gone out and spoken to our patients. We've gone out and spoken to our employees. We've spoken to our local community to figure out what are the problems that they need help solving. And that's why we've chosen the causes, and we've chosen local charities that we can partner with to share with them some of our knowledge and know-how, also some of our resources, so we can really make a difference in those areas that they really need help. And I think, environmental sustainability, I think homelessness, I think helping people, with food, and also helping parents and caregivers deal with the challenge of safe consumption and how do they teach their kids and about cannabis. And so we think that big companies, in order to be sustainable, have to be thinking of all these stakeholders. And I think investors should appreciate that we've got a long-term vision.
And as a last thing, I do want to say during your panel at the Lift Show, you mentioned that a big prediction was said about potentially edibles not being available for sale this year in Canada. You mentioned that you agree with that opinion. Do you have a timeline of when these products will be available? And on a broader sense, what's your general take on these products? A lot of excitement, a lot of rush for these, and a lot of discussion about beverages options and all these other things. Like, what's your overview moving forward, and how will CanTrust participate in this new market?
Yeah, so when I think about cannabis and sort of supply and demand, I think if you ask the typical consumer why they wouldn't use cannabis, I think the two primary answers would be it's been illegal, and two is I don't want to smoke a combustible product, right? And I think so I think those two things have been removed and alleviated, or they will when the new edibles legislation comes. Look, I think I regularly speak with Health Canada. I think that they have a very big, challenging job to figure out how to make these cannabis, cannabinoids, and these different products and formats safe for consumers, and guaranteeing that that's the case. So look, they're working on it. We will have some new form factors ready as soon as they're legal and lawful, and we are working on a variety of other verticals as well, which will launch sort of somewhat thereafter. In terms of predicting when I think edibles are going to be legal and they will be on the shelf and people can use them, look, we can't control the rules and regulations, right? So when they come out, we hope that they won't be too much different than what we've already learned, so that we don't have to change too much about our processes, so we can get things out. But my guess is that probably the first Canadian will not purchase their first edible product legally in 2019, and I think it's much more highly probable that'll happen in the first quarter of 2020.
I see. Well, Peter, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it, and hopefully we'll be catching up soon as well.
Great. Thanks so much, Brian. Really appreciate it.
For the Investing News Network from the Lift Show in Toronto, I'm Brian McGovern.